So welcome to the very first episode of Mr. Lynn's Workshop. And the first thing to note is that there's actually a Mrs. Lynn's Workshop as well. And that's her workshop there. The basic construction is the same for both workshops, but there are customised differences which we'll come to at some point in the future. But this is Mr. Lynn's Workshop. Now the first thing to note is that the ground level here is higher up than the internal floor level, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but effectively that's to keep the height from ground to the top of the roof there, roughly that edge, that top edge there. That has to be less than 2.5 meters to comply with code, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go in and have a look down the steps. So one notable feature about this workshop is that the floor level inside is actually lower than the ground level outside. You can see the two steps there. Now the actual ground level is about halfway up the top step. You step up from the outside onto the top step and then downwards. And the reason I built it like that was because in Britain there is a building code called permitted development rights, which allows you to build buildings up to a certain size within certain limits, and this building complies with all the limits. It's under 30 square meters. It's actually about 3.6 by 7.2 meters. It's about just under 28, and the height is no higher than 2.5 meters because it's just about a meter from the boundary. So if I built the workshop 2.5 meters on the ground, the internal floor is going to be about 2 meters, and that was just too low. That back wall there is actually about 2 meters high, and so in order to gain the internal height I had to sink it down a bit. Now that did actually cause me a tremendous amount of problems, as you can probably imagine. If you're a builder, you're probably shaking your head right now. And I do have a builder friend, and when we had a disaster in January he did shake his head. He actually called me naive, and he's probably right, and didn't do enough research. I was more concerned with getting as much as I can within the permitted development rights rather than thinking it through. Always a good idea to think things through. However, we do have the workshops now. They're excellent, by the way. Look at these big windows. It's a nice view of Julie's vegetable garden outside and the trees and the neighbour's property beyond. So what else is to talk about? Well, the entire workshop, both of them were built by me with hand tools only. Yep, hand tools only. Now many people don't believe me. They say, why would you do it with hand tools and not use power tools? Well, in future I may well use power tools, but at the time there was good reasons for it. And also I was a hand tool enthusiast, and I just wanted to see if I could actually build something of this size and complexity with just hand tools. And I did do it, genuinely. No electricity was used at all during the building of these two workshops. It did take me a long time, about 3 years from start to finish. Finished about this time last year, starting in 2017. And the only machinery I used was the actual mini digger to do the foundations. Right, so now for a tour. As I said, 3.6 meters along the short wall, 7.2 meters long, with plenty of windows. It's about 2.5 meters tall on this high side, and then a 5-degree sloping roof to the other side. The other wall is about 2.1 meters to the ceiling. So externally, with the ground higher up, it's about 2.5 meters to the highest point. Now what we did was we wanted to put in these roof lights. These are Corotherm roof lights, and they let in an awful lot of light, and that's what we were trying to achieve. And we also thought we'd get a bit of heating off it as well. I didn't realise how much heating we would get off these roof lights. And the walls are insulated, and so in the summer, a couple of weeks ago, it was, I don't know, 29 degrees, 32 degrees outside. Well, even with the windows open in here, it was nearly 40 degrees. I couldn't stand it. We just had to abandon work and carry on. Yeah, so that's an issue we have to resolve, probably with some kind of fans or air conditioning unit. But this is the wet bench, as I call it. It's got the iPad on it because I was doing some practice videoing. You'll notice that there's actually no legs, and this is deliberate. It's supported by one post, one strut on the left hand side, and the idea of that is to have a clear space underneath for putting stuff under, and you can see that a lot of stuff has got put under. All that stuff under there is selling on eBay, well, specifically stuff that's not shifted on eBay. So that might actually become the junk corner. Anyway, there's a large granite reference plate down there, and it's currently being used by Mrs. Lynn as a flower press. So it's out of commission for me for the time being. This is our office bench. We do have other work that we do, and this is where we do it with the printer, the air printer. And also on this bench are some Stanley planes. We'll talk about them later on in the episode. Our old iMac computer, which is really just waiting for all its data to be downloaded. It's next to useless, it's so old, and we'll get rid of it once we've downloaded all the data. So here's the steps. These are not the original steps, and this is not the original floor. The original floor got destroyed in a flood in January. A long story, so I'll tell that in a future episode, but £2,500 and 3 months later, this is the new floor, and the new steps, which are built to take these really useful boxes underneath there. This is my drum kit, a Sonar Phonic Plus 4-piece drum kit from my days in the 80s as a heavy metal drummer. I'm going to get that set up sometime. There's interesting things to talk about it, and interesting history as well. Now this wall here I'm calling my wood store. There's not that much wood. I tend not to keep a lot of wood, just keep enough for the project in hand and some offcuts and things. If you look at this shelf here, there's some large blocks in there with a mortise in this one. These are going to be legs for my workbench. Now in the last workshop I did have a workbench, but it was fixed to the wall on a frame, and somehow that frame actually got used in the construction of these workshops, so that frame's all long gone. But this is the workbench itself, and I have to get that back into commission, so I'm going to use those legs, which were actually designed for another workbench that never got built. So we go back to this wall, we can see there's some extra storage stuff in there, some toolboxes along the bottom, and if you look on this wall here, the shelving, several shelves with more stuff in them, and I have really rationalized all my junk. In March, April, this workshop was full of boxes, full of junk, and I've got rid of an awful lot of it, almost all of it. For instance, all these plastic cartons there, they were full of tools. Sold them all on eBay. There's a Marshall bass amp there that used to play bass guitar as well. That's earmarked for a friend of mine who's currently flying Embraer E2s in Africa, and he wants that. Lucky sod. I don't like having a sheet goods storage. I have to say that's got to go as soon as I can. It's OSB, hate the stuff, but it's useful. These two shelves here, hi-fi equipment and some junk. These two shelves are full of my entire stock of model kits. Now, of course, model kits aren't toys. Anyone who's a space geek, woodworking geek, aeroplane geek probably grew up with model kits, and it's mostly adults that actually build model kits, and that's all I'm going to say to justify having these. A lot of them come from the 1970s, from when I was a kid. I used to be in Air Training Corps, built loads of model kits, entered them into competitions and won as well. International Plastic Modelling Society competitions. Some of these are quite rare kits. Might build them one day, who knows. So moving along, there's some boxes here full of stuff. This is my eBay packaging department. Just a bunch of cartons waiting for use, for things getting sold on eBay when they eventually do. This is a little foot operated jigsaw. I've got this for Julie, and she did use it. It did work, but somehow in the move, the wooden strut going from the pedal to the wheel got broken, so I need to fix that. And the blade got broken as well, but it works very well, surprisingly well. She used that quite a lot, so I'll fix that. And if she doesn't want it, I'll sell it on eBay. So that's pretty much it for the tour of the workshop. As I said, every single part of this workshop was constructed just by hand, using hand saws, chisels, a multitude of screwdrivers, hand drills used as drills and as screwdrivers, and hand planes, of course, as well. Quite a lot of serious hard work, but it worked, and I'm really pleased with it. So now, talking about those hand planes, so this plane I have here is a Stanley Bailey pattern number 5.5. I got this plane in 2005, and I took it to David Charlesworth's tool tuning course in Hartland in Devon. And what we did on that course was we cleaned up the internal workings, polished them, smoothed them, made sure that they mated correctly so that they would slide against each other nicely and smoothly. But of course the main thing was we learned how to sharpen the blades and sharpen the chip breaker, which is interesting. But there's something more interesting about this plane that I'd like to talk about, and that is that I modified this plane to take the thicker, full thickness Lie-Nielsen blade, which also comes with the new Lie-Nielsen chip breaker. So if I take this off, you can see how I modified it. So it's easier if I show you on one of these frogs here. So there's the frog in the plane, and this is a similar one from a number 4.5 plane, and you can see what I've done to this frog. What I did was I removed about 1 millimeter of metal from this entire surface. This had some indentations in it here, I think there and there, extra metal, and I removed all that, in total about 1 millimeter, and I simply did it by putting some 40 grit sandpaper on a reference plate and just rubbing it backwards and forwards for about 45 minutes, and that did the trick. So why did I have to do that? Well, if you look at this blade here, this blade is nearly 4 millimeters thick, about 3.6 millimeters to be precise. The thickness of the chip breaker doesn't matter. The important thing is the thickness of the blade. Now this is the original Stanley blade, and that is only about 2 millimeters thick. So it's pretty slim, and it's a bit flexible as well. Now there's a reason why you can't just drop a full thickness blade into an ordinary Stanley plane, and that is because the depth adjustment mechanism is this little pin here, and it protrudes through the blade and engages in the slot in the chip breaker and acts against this and moves the whole assembly up and down like this. So obviously this has a finite height, and it's designed to take this 2 millimeter blade. So if you try and put the full thickness blade in, it doesn't come all the way through the blade and engage the chip breaker, so it doesn't work. So the only way to sort that out is either to put in this aftermarket 2.5 millimeter blade that came from Lie-Nielsen. They don't do them anymore, so don't try and get one on their website. Or you can remove metal from the frog, thereby lowering the entire plane downwards, thereby making the depth adjustment spigot, if you call it that, protrude up more. So that's what I did, and so now I can use the full thickness blade. Now why would you use a thicker blade? Well, it cuts down on chatter. The best way to remove chatter in the blade or the plane as you push it through is A, have a thicker blade if you can, B, have a very sharp blade, and C, take a thinner, a shallower thickness, a much thinner, what am I trying to say, a thinner shaving. So, but the Stanley blade really is a bit too thin. You can get them to work just fine, don't get me wrong, but if you can fit an aftermarket stiffer, better blade, then you should do so. So that's the number 5.5. This is from a work in progress 4.5. I've also got a number 5 and a number 7 working, and over here we've got an ordinary Stanley number 4 plane, which I've also modified to take the thicker blade. Interestingly, this one doesn't have a Lie-Nielsen chip breaker. This is a Ron Hawk chip breaker, which is again a very good chip breaker and works very well. Now these planes are for sale on eBay, which is why I'm talking about them now, and at some point in the future I'll talk about the Lie-Nielsen number 5.5 and point out the differences there. I'd just like to talk about this this point that you probably already recognised. There's no machines at all in here. And so some of you might be asking the question, well, how on earth can you do woodworking without machines? Well, of course, you can easily do woodworking without machines. But why are there no machines? Do I hate machines? No. It's simply, there's just not enough space. It's as simple as that. Can you imagine having a table saw, a band saw, a spindle moulder, a planer thicknesser, a dust extraction system? Now I've done all that. When I first started off about 2001, I converted a 2.5 metre by 5 metre garage into a workshop. It was in the last house, and you know, it made woodworking an unpleasant experience because there was no room. I kept having to move machines around to get access to push a piece of wood through. There was dust everywhere, so then I had to get a dust extractor and then some kind of mask and then overalls, and eventually I felt that I was just a machinist at the mercy of this wood rather than actually enjoying the process. And the crunch came in 2004 when finally the router table bit that finger in particular quite badly, took a huge chunk out of it. And whilst I was convalescing from that, that's when I found David Charlesworth's course in Heartland, and that got me interested in hand tools. So eventually all those machines went completely. In the last workshop there never was any machines, so for all this time I've been using hand tools. There are some machines that I would never use, and one of them is a table saw. When I did have a table saw, the amount of times that bit me or almost bit me when I thought I was doing it right, when I had the guards on and everything, I just find them ludicrously dangerous, and absolutely will not touch a table saw in any shape or form. Chop saws are a bit better, they can still bite you. Handheld circular saws, no, I wouldn't use them either. Anything with teeth that spins at thousands of RPM, I'm steering clear of. So I actually actively don't like them, but just because I don't like them doesn't mean I'm against them. And I do have some power tools. I've got a power drill, an electric drill, I've got an SDS drill, I've got a large breaker for breaking up concrete that we use quite extensively during the build. So I do have some tools, but for the purposes that they're required. And those tools can't bite you, not very badly anyway. Now hand tools, of course they can bite you as well. You can cut yourself, but you're never going to cut yourself as badly as you would with, say, a table saw or a chop saw, where you can lose a finger in a blink of an eye even though you're doing everything right. You'd really have to get it very wrong to saw off a finger with a hand saw. But the simple reason is there's just no room. It's as simple as that. I like to have plenty of space in the workshop, so all I'm going to have is the workbench basically and a toolbox, and that's all you need. And hand tools, yes, they create dust. It's not true to say they don't, but they mainly create shavings, and the dust they do create is not at high velocity, it's not very fine, chopped up in the air. So yeah, you do have to take some precautions with dust, but it's definitely not as bad as with machines. And of course, hand tools are quiet. I've got neighbours to think of. You know, they use hand tools, power tools, and I can hear them, and you know, and it's annoying to me, so I'm not going to take part in that noise. It's up to them what they do. They're all great guys, don't get me wrong, and we're all kind of craftsmen up and down the street, so we have a good time with each other. But no, for me, it's the peace and quiet of hand tools against the danger, and not to mention considerable expense to get good quality power tools or machines. So that's the reason why there's no machines. Now I have put the electrics in this workshop from the thinking about the future proofing. That's what I'm trying to say, in case when I'm long gone somebody comes here and wants to use machines. Well, they can do. There's even a 20 amp supply for more high powered machines. So everything is set up for any kind of workshop. The tool that I might get at some point is a small electric lathe. Not at the moment, but at some point in the future, perhaps. Anyway, I just wanted to explain why there is no machines in the workshop, and there isn't going to be any machines in the workshop, not even a bandsaw. There's nothing a machine can do that I can't by hand. It's as simple as that. So what's the point of spending the money on the machine? I'd rather spend the money on a very, very high quality, easy working hand tool than a machine. So having said that, I'm going to be making things with hand tools, and if you stick out with the channel, you'll see how I overcome some of the problems of using hand tools where you might think a power tool or a machine would make the job easier. No doubt. However, we have to work with what we have. So that's what's coming in the future. So that's it for episode 1, folks. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.